For the first time since the war in Ukraine began, NATO fighter jets opened fire on Russian targets. That's right, in the early hours between September 9th and 10th, 2025, something historic happened in the skies over Eastern Europe. 19 Russian drones crossed the border and entered Polish airspace, and for the first time in almost 3 years of tension, Allied forces responded with direct interceptions. And what happened after was even more significant. Poland activated NATO, putting the whole Atlantic alliance on emergency alert. Article 5 might be inevitable, and everybody knows what Article 5 could trigger, plunging the world into a nuclear conflict. To understand the seriousness of what happened, we need to roll the clock back a few hours. It was around 11:30 p.m. on Monday, September 9th, Central European local time, when Polish radars began detecting unidentified objects crossing their eastern border. What seemed like just another massive Russian strike against Ukraine was about to become the first real test of NATO's limits since the conflict began. During one of Russia's largest air operations in recent months, dozens of kamikaze drones were launched at targets in western Ukraine. But something went wrong, or maybe too right, depending on perspective. At least 19 of these unmanned vehicles strayed from their planned routes and penetrated deep into Polish territory, some flying more than 30 miles inside NATO borders. What followed was a scene few had ever imagined. Polish F-16 fighters, supported by Allied aircraft, took to the night skies and started hunting Russian drones over the sovereign territory of the Atlantic Alliance. Within hours, wreckage from at least 8 Russian drones was scattered across fields and villages inside Poland. Imagine the tension inside Warsaw's command rooms that night. Radar operators watching glowing blips cross red lines that were never supposed to be breached. Fighter pilots receiving orders to intercept Russian targets for the first time since World War II. The commander of Poland's Air Force later described the moment as a definitive test of our defensive readiness. Protocols worked exactly as they should have: radar detection, confirmation of intrusion, political authorization to engage, and coordinated military execution. But the historic weight of those decisions, made in minutes, was enormous. These were NATO's first official shots at Russian equipment in nearly 80 years. The operation involved not only Polish forces but also aircraft from at least 3 other Allied countries patrolling the skies in the region as part of NATO's air policing missions. Military sources confirmed that German and British fighters took part in the interceptions, marking direct involvement from multiple Allied nations. But the tension peaked when the first air-to-air missiles were fired. Picture it. 20-something pilots, born into a world where Russia and the West at least kept up a facade of diplomacy, pressing triggers that turned Russian drones into fireballs over Polish farmland. Each explosion in the night sky marked not just the destruction of a piece of military hardware, but the end of a 30-year era of passive containment. When the sun rose on September 10th, residents of small towns like Wyraki in Lublin province woke up to a scene straight out of a movie. Smoking twisted metal in their yards, rooftops pierced by fragments, and a reality few Europeans ever thought they'd live through again: the physical arrival of an international confrontation on their own soil. The wreckage revealed technical details experts see as crucial for understanding Russia's intentions. Preliminary analysis showed at least some of the drones were Shahed 136 types, also known by the Russian name Garan-2, Iranian-made equipment widely used in attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure. Military forensic investigators worked all day gathering evidence. Every piece of metal, every electronic component, every trace of fuel could tell a different story. Navigation error, intentional sabotage, or, the most worrying possibility, a deliberate test of NATO's response times and defensive capabilities. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk personally visited one of the impacted areas, where a home had its roof damaged by wreckage. Speaking at the site, Tusk was blunt: "This is no longer an accident. This is a pattern of behavior that Poland and our allies can no longer tolerate in silence." Now we come to the political core of the matter. NATO's Article 4 is like the West's emergency alarm button. When a member state feels its security is threatened, it can request that all 29 other members gather to discuss the situation and coordinate a response. Don't confuse it with the famous Article 5, which lays out automatic collective defense. An attack against one is an attack against all. Article 4 is more subtle, but no less important. It's the mechanism that allows the alliance to act preventively before a crisis escalates into open confrontation. Since NATO's creation in 1949, Article 4 has only been invoked 8 times. The last time was in 2022, when several countries called consultations after Russia launched its military operation in Ukraine. Now, for the first time, it's being triggered because of a direct physical violation of a member's territory. Here's how the process works. Within the next 48 hours, representatives of all allied countries will meet in Brussels to assess evidence, share intelligence, and decide if additional measures are necessary. That could mean boosting defenses, coordinated sanctions, or even a more aggressive military posture. But to fully grasp what happened, we need to talk about the technology involved. The Shahid 136 is a low-cost suicide drone, about $20,000 each, just a fraction of a traditional cruise missile. They're designed to fly low, slip past radars, and explode on target. The most intriguing technical issue is how 19 drones missed their targets so systematically. Weapons experts see three possibilities. First, GPS navigation failures caused by electronic interference. Second, incorrect programming of target coordinates. Third, and most troubling, intentional redirection to test Polish defenses. GPS can be jammed or spoofed by electronic warfare systems. Russia and Ukraine both use these extensively, creating interference bubbles that can throw drones off course. But air defense experts find it unlikely that 19 drones would all fail in exactly the same way at once. Flying at altitudes between 150 and 650 feet, these drones are particularly hard to detect and shoot down. They move slowly, like small civilian aircraft, and their small size confuses radars built to track larger planes. As expected, Moscow denied any deliberate responsibility. The Kremlin spokesman called Poland's accusations groundless and provocative, claiming there was no conclusive evidence the wrecked drones were of Russian origin. Russia's embassy in Warsaw went further, stating that Poland once again failed to present evidence of the Russian origin of the objects that entered its airspace. This carefully phrased wording suggests a diplomatic strategy to buy time while forensic work continues. Russian officials also argued that the maximum range of the drones used in the attack doesn't exceed 430 miles, implying that drones launched from Russian territory couldn't have reached the areas in Poland where they were found. This version, however, ignores the possibility of launches from Belarus or occupied regions of Ukraine. Russia's strategy seems twofold: deny direct responsibility while at the same time testing the West's limits. It's a tactic known as controlled escalation, pushing until they meet resistance, but always keeping room to pull back diplomatically. The alliance's response was fast and coordinated. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte released an official statement confirming that several allies stood alongside Poland in answering the incident. This was the first official confirmation that multiple NATO nations actively took part in combat operations tied to the Ukraine conflict. Military command sources revealed that NATO's integrated air defense system worked exactly as designed. Radars from different countries shared information in real time, enabling continuous tracking of targets even as they crossed borders. Fighters already airborne on air policing duty were able to respond quickly. The most significant aspect was the political coordination. While Polish, German, and British pilots chased Russian drones across Polish skies, an emergency conference call linked Allied capitals to authorize every step of escalation. Each order to open fire wasn't just a local commander's call, it was validated by the alliance's joint command. This show of operational unity sent a clear message to Moscow. NATO isn't just a treaty on paper, but a fully integrated military machine capable of quick, coordinated responses. But let's look beyond the geopolitical analysis. There are real people dealing with the fallout of this incident. Rural Polish families woke up to smoldering wreckage in their yards, a reminder that global confrontations often begin with small incidents in forgotten places. Maria Kowalski, 67, a resident of Wyraki, described it like this: "I heard a strange noise in the night, like a really loud motorcycle engine. In the morning, there was burned metal in my cornfield and uniformed soldiers measuring everything." Her home was just 150 feet from one of the crash sites, a reminder of how historic events touch individual lives. The Polish government promised full compensation for material damage, but the psychological impact is much harder to fix. Border communities, already living under constant stress from the nearby war in Ukraine, now face the reality that their homes could become unwilling battlegrounds in an international confrontation. Local authorities reported a big jump in calls to mental health hotlines and requests for evacuation plan information. The fear isn't just about this incident. It's about what it might mean going forward. International security experts point to three main scenarios in the coming days and weeks, each with dramatically different implications for European stability. Scenario 1: operational error. If forensic analysis shows the drone strayed because of technical failures or unintentional interference, tensions may slowly cool. Still, the precedent of direct intercepts has changed the game. Now, there's a clear protocol for immediate military response. Scenario 2. Deliberate negligence. If evidence suggests intentional carelessness in the drone's trajectories, basically using Polish territory as a testing zone, the Allied response will be far tougher. More economic sanctions, heavier military reinforcement on NATO's eastern flank, and possibly proportional strikes on Russian infrastructure. Scenario 3. Calculated provocation. The most dangerous scenario is that Moscow deliberately aimed drones at Poland to test reaction times, defenses, and NATO's political unity. If confirmed, this would count as Russia's first direct attack on a NATO member, forcing a response that shows strength without triggering all-out war. Intelligence analysis over the next 72 hours will be crucial. Drone fragments could reveal modified navigation systems, program coordinates, even electronic communications hinting at operational intent. This incident echoes far beyond Europe, shifting strategic calculations in Washington, Beijing, and other world capitals. For the United States, it marks the first time American-made military gear provided to NATO was used against Russian systems in response to direct aggression. The Polish F-16s that carried out the interceptions are US-built, creating a direct link between America's defense industry and this historic moment. Analysts in Washington are paying close attention to how it might ripple into other hotspots. If NATO's response is seen as effective and proportional, it could strengthen alliances in the Indo-Pacific, where tensions with China are rising. In China, strategists are watching how Western democracies handle calculated provocations. The precedent set in Poland may influence Beijing's thinking on Taiwan and the South China Sea. For developing countries, especially those balancing ties with both East and West, this incident shows how fast regional flare-ups can spiral into global confrontations. Big confrontations often start with incidents that look small but test limits and reveal true intentions. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was shot by a young Serb, but World War I happened because diplomacy failed to contain the fallout. Same thing here. The Polish drone incident may seem minor compared to the hundreds of thousands dead in Ukraine, but its importance lies in the precedent. For the first time since 1949, NATO fired back at Russian hardware on its own soil. That line has been crossed, and there's no uncrossing it. Diplomatic analysts draw parallels with Cold War incidents that nearly escalated into full conflict: the downing of U.S. pilot Gary Powers in 1960, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, naval clashes in the Baltic in the 1980s. The key difference this time: NATO's response was immediate and coordinated among multiple allies, showing how much collective response capacity has evolved. What happened overnight between September 9th and 10th, 2025, marks the end of passive containment and the start of a new phase of active confrontation between Russia and the West. 19 drones crossed an invisible but critical line, and the response permanently changed the rules of engagement for everyone involved. In the coming days, decisions made in Brussels, Washington, Moscow, and elsewhere will decide whether this incident is remembered as the moment diplomatic wisdom beat military escalation, or as the first chapter in a wider confrontation. For everyone following along, the message is clear: we're watching history unfold. Not through grand speeches or solemn ceremonies, but through the hum of drones cutting across the European night and interceptor missiles ripping the skies in defense of democratic principles. We'll keep covering every development in this story. If you want a deep technical breakdown of the defense systems involved, a full explanation of NATO's protocols, or play-by-play coverage of the next Brussels consultations, drop a comment. This is only the beginning of a story we all hope ends in wisdom, not tragedy.